you noticed how often debates about faith and politics become debates about worthiness? Who's in, who's out, and who gets to control the gate? What if these old stories are trying to nudge us away from border check religion and toward something simpler? People first, purity or identity tests never. Welcome to Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be taking a look at 3 readings from the Christian Bible through the lens of sacred myth. As we reflect on the readings for the 28th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle C, we'll explore why help shouldn't depend on identity, how zeal can slide into gatekeeping, and why gratitude belongs with the real helpers and the systems that make help easy to reach. In this episode, we're asking an honest question. What happens if we focus on widening the circle of care, removing the barriers to access, and measuring our faith or our ethics by how quickly and fairly people can get care? Because if belief is going to mean anything, it should look like open doors and neighbors protected. So grab a comfy seat, a glass of your favorite beverage, and let's look at some ancient stories together in this edition of Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be exploring the readings for the 28th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle C of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. In this series, we're exploring readings from the Bible through the lens of sacred myth, looking for interpretations and lessons that don't demand a belief in the supernatural. What that means from a practical standpoint is that we will assume that these stories and writings are fiction, written by pre-scientific people with their own agendas and different audiences. Now, you might agree with the lessons I find, but I encourage you to look for something that rings true to you. Part of the beauty of understanding these writings as sacred myths is that we're free to interpret them for ourselves. We're free to learn the lessons that we need right now. So with that, let's dive in. As I said, tonight we'll be looking at the readings for the 28th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle C. Our first reading is from 2 Kings. It's chapter 5, verses 14 through 17. Our second reading is from the second letter to Timothy. It's chapter 2, verses 8 through 13. And our gospel reading is from Luke. It's chapter 17, verses 11 through 19. Now we'll start by going through all 3 of the readings, and then we'll look for the messages and the main lesson in each one. Finally, we'll bring everything together, look at what it means for us today, and talk about where we go from here. And with that, let's begin. Our first reading is from 2 Kings. Naaman went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as Elisha had told him, and his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. Then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, "Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. So please accept a gift from your servant." Elisha answered, "As surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing." And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. "If you will not," said Naaman, "please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry, for your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord." Our second reading is from the second letter to Timothy. Beloved, remember Jesus Christ, raised from the dead, descended from David. This is my gospel, for which I am suffering, even to the point of being chained like a criminal. But God's word is not chained. Therefore I endure everything for the sake of the elect, that they too may obtain the salvation that is in Christ Jesus with eternal glory. Here is a trustworthy saying. If we died with him, we will also live with him. If we endure, we will also reign with him. If we disown him, he will also disown us. If we are faithless, he remains faithful, for he cannot disown himself. And our gospel reading is from Luke. On his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." When he saw them, he said, "Go, show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." All right, so let's go back and take a critical look at these readings and see what learnings and lessons we can find if we dig around just a little bit. So our first reading was from 2 Kings. And if we set aside the miracle language, Naaman's story becomes a simple ethics lesson about who deserves care. Right, Naaman, he's an outsider, a military officer from another culture, and still the help he needs isn't withheld. That cuts against the old habit of sorting people into worthy and unworthy. The humanist take is pretty clear. Need, not nationality, creed, or status, need sets the bar for aid. An open heart here isn't a ticket to earn a cure. It's a reminder to drop our gatekeeping and meet people where they are. Meet people as people. Translate that to today and you see where we stumble. We ration compassion through paperwork, borders, beliefs, or lifestyle. We turn clinics, shelters, and public services into administrative obstacle courses, and then act surprised when suffering continues to spread. A better reading of this passage is a design brief. Make help accessible by default. No tribal loyalty tests, a lot fewer hoops, more language access, approaches that reduce harm, and policies that focus on outcomes, not on moral policing. Are people safer? Are they healthier? Are they housed? On the ground, this looks ordinary and practical. We should ask, what would help right now? Instead of, do they deserve it? This reading from the Christian Bible says that they very clearly do deserve it because they're human beings. So we need to support organizations with inclusive practices. We need to choose generosity over suspicion when we meet someone at the metaphorical gate. And in our own circles, widen the welcome. Share resources, advocate for equitable services, and practice the humility to receive help too. Not just to give help, but have the humility to receive help, because we all will need it at some point. The point of the reading wasn't about converting anyone. It was about never withholding care. So the main lesson I got from our first reading is that everyone is worthy of our help. Stripped of its supernatural framing, this story invites us to stop sorting and start serving. When we center human dignity over identity or ideology, our communities get kinder and stronger, measurably. Build systems and habits that default to inclusion. And let your first question be how to help, not whether to help. Everyone is worthy of our help. Our second reading was from the second letter to Timothy. And when we read this as myth, the passage shows how boundary lines get drawn and then tightened. The mixed logic about Jesus' lineage, the for the sake of the elect language, and the transactional slogans, if we do X, we get Y, If we deny, we're denied. Those all function as identity tests. Now, that may have rallied a threatened community in the past, but it also shrinks the circle and starts creating rules for who's in and who's out. When stories turn into loyalty oaths, people become categories. Insiders who qualify, outsiders who don't. That's a warning sign. It's not a map we should be using. Look at this through a humanist lens. It makes me ask this question. What happens to real people when supernatural identity rules run the show? Well, I think it's obvious. Compassion gets rationed. Dissent is punished. And policy becomes a tool for sorting rather than a tool for serving. Zeal, religious or political zeal, slides right into gatekeeping. We care, but only for those who pass the test. Communities don't get healthier that way. They get brittle, and they start to break. The antidote is true humility and radical dignity. Focus on fact-based truth, not unprovable mythology and supernatural beliefs. Don't just allow disagreement. Encourage respectful disagreement and emphasize that we can understand each other without agreeing on everything. And then define belonging by how we treat each other, not by perfect agreement with a creed. Practically speaking, when we can swap exclusionary identity tests for more inclusive integrity tests that anyone can meet. Are we telling the truth? Are we widening protection for people at risk? Are we leaving room for conscience and debate? To do this, we should choose coalitions over echo chambers. Coalitions of people with differing ideas. Coalitions require listening and understanding, but not unquestioned agreement. We should choose due process over the punishment-first approach the current administration seems to prefer. And we should choose universal access over hoops that people have to jump through. Administrative barriers to social services, for example, are expensive to maintain, and their primary, unspoken purpose isn't to combat fraud. The primary purpose of administrative barriers is to simply make it difficult for even qualified people to access those services. That's why we should also measure the effectiveness of what we're doing by using impact as the metric, not in-group status. If a rule harms the vulnerable or rewards domination, it fails, no matter how pious the language around it might sound. Anyway, the main lesson I got from our second reading is that exclusionary thinking is dangerous. Take this passage from Paul as a caution, not a template. Let perseverance mean staying loyal to people and to reality, not to shrinking circles and identity tests. Build communities where worth isn't up for a vote. And disagreement doesn't mean exile, and help isn't conditional on your supernatural or political beliefs. Exclusionary thinking is dangerous. Okay, our final reading was from the Gospel of Luke. And if we set the miracle aside, the scene becomes a lesson in where gratitude belongs. 10 people in crisis ask for help. 1 returns to say thanks. And he's the outsider, the Samaritan. Jesus healed the lepers. Not the priests, not the religion most of them followed. The priests and the religion didn't heal him. Jesus healed the lepers. So thanking the healer was the proper thing to do. Oh yes, in the story, Jesus said it was proper to praise God for being healed, but according to the gospel, Jesus is God. So he's just saying it's proper to praise me because I'm God and I'm the one who healed you. When we apply that to what happens today, the point isn't to credit your religious beliefs. The point is to recognize the actual people who made healing possible. Doctors and nurses, lab techs and caseworkers, family caregivers, even the patient's own grit and determination. Thank the people who showed up, even if they're not in your tribe. Gratitude, then, is more than a feeling. It's a practice that strengthens the very systems we rely on. Say the words, yes, but also write the note to the nurse. And complete the patient survey so a clinic gets funded. Advocate for safe staffing. Support public health. And treat those that society still labels unclean, treat them with respect and inclusion. The ancient stigma around leprosy maps too easily onto today's realities. It's not leprosy today, but it's things like mental illness, addiction, disability, homelessness. A secular reading replaces identity tests with care. Harm reduction, housing first, accessible clinics, and policies that make help easy to reach. There's also a quiet challenge here. When you've been helped, become the helper. Thank you can grow into, how can I pay this forward? Join a patient and family advisory council. Donate blood. Deliver a meal. Learn CPR. Mentor a caregiver. Support a medical debt relief fund. Gratitude, practiced this way, turns relief into responsibility. And it keeps the circle of care expanding. Anyway, the main lesson I got from our gospel reading is that we should thank the people who help us. Taken this way, the story isn't about magical cures. It's about seeing the people who make healing possible and strengthening the networks that keep us alive and dignified. Aim your gratitude at the real helpers. Make it actionable. And then join them so someone else has a shorter, kinder road. We should thank the people who help us. All right, let's review the lessons we've talked about so far. In our first reading from 2 Kings, the main lesson I came away with was, everyone is worthy of our help. In our second reading from 2 Timothy, the main lesson I got was, exclusionary thinking is dangerous. And finally, the main lesson I got from our gospel reading was, we should thank the people who help us. It feels like most political and religious issues today boil down to who's in, who's out, and who gets to decide. But these readings push us in the opposite direction. These readings say, stop arguing about worthiness and figure out how to care for everyone. Naaman's story knocks down things like border checks. And the lepers remind us to aim our gratitude at the real helpers, not at the sky, and to build the systems that make help easy to reach. And Paul's little pastoral pep talk goes off the rails only when zeal turns into gatekeeping. Now, when we look at these readings through a humanist lens, the conclusion, though, is simple. People first, identity tests never. That means we need to treat care as a design problem. We need fewer hoops and more access, outcomes we can measure. And let the only debate be how to deliver help to everyone quickly, fairly, and with dignity. That approach reflects core values that transcend belief systems and creeds. So let's widen the circle of care on purpose and make our default position be that everyone is included. So let's step back and take another look at these readings overall and see if we can figure out what these lessons really mean to us in our daily lives. To do this, I'll try to answer two questions. So what and now what? Okay, so what? Why should we care about any of this? Well, we should care about this because worthiness tests turn neighbors into targets. When politics is framed as who's in and who's out, well, cruelty gets morally glossed over. Borders, papers, and labels start to look like character assessments. They aren't. A people-first ethic says need determines care. If someone is hungry, they're fleeing danger, seeking work, the question isn't, are they worthy? But the question is, what helps and how fast can we deliver it? Look, immigration enforcement is a recent invention. It started with the Immigration Act of 1891, which created the first federal agency to inspect and process immigrants. It established exclusion criteria and appointed U.S. immigrant inspectors at ports of entry. Prior to that, people went where they wanted and had to abide by the laws of that place, including paying taxes and whatnot. In the history of mankind, this makes immigration enforcement a brand spanking new concept. And it's a concept that has become the bedrock upon which hatred, bigotry, racism, and xenophobia firmly rest. This is important because having scapegoats allows bad actors to sell certainty and wreck communities. MAGA-style rhetoric offers a simple villain and a promise of control, and that's very tempting to many people when life feels chaotic. But that script trades truth for tribal comfort. We've already talked about a better yardstick. Does this idea widen the circle of care? Does it reduce harm? If not, it's just anger and fear manifesting as policy and law. Ironically, the best way we can guard our minds and our neighbors is by refusing easy enemies. We should care about this because equal justice beats punishment by category. A humane society applies the same laws and due process to everyone. Full stop. Mass suspicion and mass deportation are collective punishments that breed fear and error. Treat newcomers as neighbors under the same rules you'd want for your family. Right? Evidence, fairness, proportionate consequences, but also room to contribute. This is important because values don't matter until they change what we do. If your faith or your ethics points to radical welcome, well, let that guide your choices. Right? What you support, what you challenge, how you talk with friends and family. Measure leaders by the care they extend, not the borders they harden. And from the kitchen table, use your voice. Speak up for policies that make help easier to reach and that make life safer for more people. This should be our bottom line. People first, identity tests never. That's how we move from us versus them to all of us. And it's how ordinary folks, right from home, make public life kinder, saner, and fairer for everyone. And the last question I try to answer is, now what? What are we supposed to do? Where do we go from here? Well, let's start by acknowledging that this idea, people first, identity tests never, is easy to say. It's easy to understand. It's very hard to wholeheartedly embrace. We have all grown up believing that the border of our country is almost sacred. Many of us were raised with a religion that claimed to hold the only true spiritual beliefs, making all other religions false by definition. We grew up rooting for one team over all others, and we were constantly looking for identity markers for ourselves and for others. It starts when you're young. For me, it was categories like nerd, jock, and stoner. Today, young people identify as hipster, goth, emo, punk, skater, gamer, geeks, and so many more. All of this lends itself very well to the underlying belief that us versus them is just natural and inevitable. Whether it is or isn't natural doesn't matter. The fact is that it's not inevitable. But overcoming these built-in biases starts with some honest self-reflection. So with that in mind, here's your question for the week. What do you believe border enforcement is for? And how do your core values, things like fairness, safety, compassion, due process, how do your core values shape that belief? What do you believe border enforcement is for, and how do your core values shape that belief? Now, as you're answering this question, make sure you dig a bit deeper. Where did your beliefs about border enforcement come from? Family stories, news sources, personal experiences? If your answer is something like, my beliefs come from logic and reason, that's not good enough. In fact, that's a cop-out. Logic and reason requires input from things like family stories, verifiable news sources, personal experiences. So don't cop out and say, oh, logic and reason. No, dive in further. Not long ago, I heard someone online say, it's only logical that people who are here illegally will commit crimes and do other illegal things. No, that's not logical at all. Because if you look at the facts, communities with higher numbers of undocumented immigrants have lower rates of crime, especially violent crimes. Now that is logical because the punishment that an undocumented person could receive, right, being deported back to a country they fled from, right, that punishment is far greater than the punishment a citizen would receive. So you're not allowed to simply claim that your beliefs about border enforcement are based on logic and reason and leave it at that. You need to explore the inputs that caused you to come to the conclusions and the beliefs you hold. Who do you picture when you hear immigrant? What about undocumented immigrant? Or illegal immigrant? And how would your stance change if that person were your child, or your neighbor, or your younger self seeking safety or work? We said scapegoats sell certainty. Equal justice beats punishment by category, and values don't matter until they change what we do. This question helps you trace where your views on borders come from, which values they serve, and how they affect the way you treat real people. Answering this question matters because it aligns your opinions with your values, and that alignment makes you steadier, kinder, and more persuasive in real conversations. When you name the value you're protecting, you can drop the us versus them script and talk about concrete solutions, like clear rules, fair processes, humane treatment. You can do that without losing your commitment to safety. I used to believe that we needed strong border security in order to protect us and our jobs. It seemed logical to me at the time, but that was the logic of the ignorant and uninformed. Especially once I moved to El Paso, Texas, my opinion changed. El Paso is right on the border with Mexico, across the Rio Grande from Juarez. While I was there, Juarez became a battleground between drug cartels, and it also became the murder capital of the world. Now, El Paso, during that time, remained one of the safest cities of its size in the U.S., and all of the wonderful people I worked with in Juarez, all of the Mexican nationals there, well, they were just as appalled as the rest of us over the drug war and the killings. They weren't anxious to move to the U.S. They wanted to clean up their own city and country. Now, practically, this reflection lowers stress, less outrage, and more clarity. It improves family and community dialogue because you can explain your view without attacking people. And this reflection helps you make choices you feel proud of, what you share, who you support, and how you show up for neighbors on both sides of a line that's been drawn. So take some time this week to explore the question, what do you believe border enforcement is for, and how do your core values shape that belief? Or don't they shape it at all? Well, before I wrap things up, I'd like to leave you with one more thought. A poem by Emma Lazarus is at the base of the Statue of Liberty. Now, most of us know the line, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free." Lazarus reframed national identity around the idea of welcome, not around worthiness tests. The next line of that poem reads, "Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." The lamp beside the golden door is a values yardstick. If our stance on border enforcement can't make sense alongside that lamp, right, alongside compassion, safety, due process, and fair chance, then our stance needs work. That's exactly what this week's question asks. What do you believe border enforcement is for? And which core values are you actually protecting? When you write about your beliefs, use Lazarus's lines as a calibration tool. Do your ideas widen the circle of care while keeping people safe? Do they protect due process for everyone? Do they treat newcomers as neighbors under the same laws you'd want for your own family? If the answer is no, then adjust. The point isn't to have a perfect slogan. It's to hold a clear, humane standard you can explain at the kitchen table and then support at the ballot box. Let the lamp guide your answer and guide whatever next small action you decide to take. All right, we've come to the end of this episode. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back again next week. But in the meantime, I encourage you to engage with our question for the week and pay attention to the important lessons you come across wherever you find them. You'll create a more purposeful and joyful life, and you'll start to feel more connected to the world and the people around you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Mythologizing the Bible as we did a deeper dive into the readings for the 28th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle C of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. Remember that our conclusion here is simple. People first, identity tests never. The Bible readings used for this episode are from the Holy Bible, New International Version, NIV. Copyright 1973, 1978, 1984, and 2011 by Biblica Inc. Used by permission, all rights reserved worldwide. Thank you for listening. If you like this content, please consider telling a friend about it. The more people who hear the positive messages I'm sharing, the better. Mythologizing the Bible is a live-streamed series held most Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on twitch.tv/thecodaproject. Every week, the audio of these Mythologizing the Bible presentations is released as a podcast. You can find both a podcast and the occasional video versions of the presentations at thecodaproject.com. To learn more, to subscribe to my mailing list, and to keep up on everything I'm doing with the Coda Project, please visit thecodaproject.com.